A little bit about Talk IT, a training partner with a difference. Talk IT plays a vital role in providing learning solutions that result in reduced costs and improved efficiency. This equates to increased innovation. Innovate, adapt, accelerate through training and certification. The stats. 65 instructors are available at all times. We have the biggest leading market share with our international vendors. 6 different training delivery methods are available, and we train 15,000 students yearly. We provide authorized instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training, certification, and enablement solutions. A few of our training areas are analytics and data management, application development, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and robotic process automation. Get in touch by going to our website or emailing us.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second episode of the What's the Future webinar series brought to you by Amazon Web Services, Talk IT, and Suits and Sneakers. I just want to make sure before we get going with all the bits and pieces, I'm going to have a look here quickly. Can you quickly tell me in the chat section, are you all hearing and seeing perfectly? Thank you so much. Great. So, like I said, welcome to the second edition of this webinar series. It's so exciting to have you here. I have to just level with you. This is a total experiment that we are just having the best fun with. This new medium is a totally different skill set that requires totally different thinking to master. And this is just something that we're kind of taking on with both hands, and the learnings have been absolutely phenomenal. So as always, I just want to be keenly aware of the time and value your time that you're here. I want to start by saying thank you to each and every one of you for being here, for being live. I want to remind you that if for any reason you have to shoot, we totally understand. The link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to every person as soon as this webinar is complete. So thank you so much for being here. You want to grab it quickly? It's all good. Alrighty, so what I want to just do very quickly is just take you through a little bit about where we've come from and where we're going to, and then I'm going to introduce Erik, our guest speaker, to you. So last week was the first episode of this What's the Future webinar series. This is a series that's been put together by Amazon Web Services, Talk IT, Suits and Sneakers. The idea has really been, how do we put together a series that creates enormous value to the people on the other end? So that's really where we've come from. We've been trying to, I guess, set up each week with a different speaker that will add value to you from a COVID-19 perspective. This pandemic has come through, it's ripped normality as we know it, and people are scrambling for where to from here. What does business look like? How do I show up mentally and emotionally, and so forth? So that's really it. We've been having lots of fun putting together. Last week we started with John Sarney, the first episode. He spoke about a topic called Future Now. If for any reason you missed it, you can email us straight after this and you can just ask for a link to the recording. And then this week, as I mentioned, we're moving alongside with Erik Kruger, who's going to be talking about leadership in transit. So that's really the heart and soul of it. What I want to do very quickly is I want to go to the polls section. This is something we've been trialing a little bit. And I want to launch the poll and I want to see if this works. So I'm going to say launch. So if you guys can quickly go check out the poll section if it's not showing up already, and I'd love you just to answer the first question, being, what is the future of training in your perspective? And the answers that you can have is instructor-led classroom training, instructor-led virtual training, e-learning. And then second of all, the second question is, you want to upskill yourself, and the but kind of follows with, I don't know where to start. I don't know which provider to use. It's too expensive. My company doesn't support this, none of the above. So I'm going to give you guys about 15, 20 more seconds. Thank you. It's telling me how many of you have voted. This is excellent. Don't you just love technology and what you can do with this? 10 seconds. I'll let you do your thing. This is great. At the bottom, if you haven't found it, there's a little poll section. All right, guys, just for time's sake, I'm going to cut it there. Thank you so much. Okay. So, like I said to you, this is the second episode of the What's the Future webinar series brought to you by Amazon Web Services, Talk IT, Suits and Sneakers. Like I mentioned to you also, last week we had John Sane. He did Future Now. The next guest that we have is a guy called Erik Kruger. He's one of my favorite people in the universe. Sound very nice, but it's the God's honest truth. And you know, when I kind of got into this with Talk IT and Amazon Web Services, when we try to lay out the content throughout the weeks, we really try to tackle topics that we hoped would help anybody and everybody listening. Especially in this time, business-wise, things are crazy. Personal life, people's lives are crazy. So we try to tackle this. And as you can hear, this concept of leadership in transit is fascinating. So what I want to do is I want to just take a little bit of time to introduce you to Erik and just share with you why he was the person I picked second in the series. Erik is someone that I met probably about 3 years ago, and he was running a very interesting concept at the time called Better Man. And he had basically started this newsletter for men where he was really trying to upskill men and create this club. And it was actually phenomenal. And I kept getting, besides actually being a fan of the platform, I kept getting bombarded left, right, and center from people always asking me, have you met Erik Kruger? Why did you guys do something together? And then as fate would have with these things, one day we finally had a coffee catch up. We realized that we were 5 days apart in age. We had very, very similar interests. We were trying to do very similar things. From that day, we really hit it off. And one of my favorite things about Erik is I genuinely believe he has he's one of the best listeners, and yet he's able to take that listening and he's able to disseminate information in such a powerful, practical, structural way. And I think it's so, you know, sometimes you get people who talk in very broad strokes, and that is important, but at the same time, you need to have people who can really get down into the detail where the detail matters. And so my thinking was to have someone like John open up for us last week and set a real nice context of where we're at broadly, and then ask Erik to kind of follow on from that and get into some real detail. So just want to share some of that thinking with you as you watch through today, like what we were trying to do. Like I said to you, every touch point of this series, I've personally tried to think of, how do we add value to people on the other side? That being you guys. Like, how can we make it worth your time to be here? So that's it from me. I'm going to jump ship. And I want to just briefly introduce Erik. We're going to have a short break and then we're going to jump straight to him. So for those of you who don't know, Erik is a speaker and a writer. Erik, sorry, it's such a, let me just tell you quickly before I get going. There is, as you guys would know, we're in studio and there are about 4,000 moving parts. It's actually really funny and crazy to be at the same time. And it's quite a skill set to learn this. So every now and then, if you see us go a little bit moggy, you'll understand that we're just kind of trying to make sure this is all okay. Okay, so, and by the way, we don't mind things not being perfect. It's just about being valuable. So, Erik Kruger. He is an executive coach who specializes in leadership and high-performing teams. He's got a company called Modern Breed, which is an international learning and development company. He's been doing some phenomenal things all around. He speaks and he writes largely on the topics of leadership and how to create high-performing teams. He's really into the detail. I really think you're going to love what he has to say. So sit back, sit tight, get comfortable. Hope you enjoy today's session, and Erik will be joining you right after this.
Whether you're working in retail or real estate, with financial data or photos, your business depends on applications that run reliably and securely at a cost that scales with your needs. Amazon Web Services provides a complete set of cloud computing services accessed via the internet to help you build and run those applications. At AWS, we provide compute, storage, and database services which enable your organization to quickly provision the IT resources it needs without significant capital investment. Pretty much everything you would want to do in a traditional data center is available with AWS. But all our services are available on a pay-as-you-go basis, no upfront capital expense. Instead, you'll find highly durable storage services, low latency databases, and a suite of application development tools which you'll only pay for as you're using them.
Hey everyone, it is really great to be here with a couple of hundred of you today, before we even get going, I'd love to just quickly see in the chat box, just a quick hi, just to see if you guys can also hear me, that my audio is coming through okay. Hi, sup, cool. All right, perfect. Let's just get going. That's good enough for me. Mark, I'm going to close down this window. So I'll come back to the chat box a bit later to have a look at what you guys have been saying, the questions you've been asking. But for now, we're just going to jump straight into it. We love speaking about leadership, and specifically the qualities, the traits, the skills that we need to lead today, but also into the future. If you go and do a quick Google search, you'll find thousands of 10-point, 15-point, 20-point lists that tell you exactly what you need if you want to be a leader going forward. I did this for you, by the way. I went to Google and I found the very first result when I said, what are the skills needed for leadership? And this is what you require if you are going to lead into the future. You need to be honest and have integrity. You need to be confident. You need to be able to inspire others. You need to be committed, but also be passionate. You need to be a good communicator. You need to have good, decisive decision-making capabilities. You should be accountable. You should be able to delegate, but also empower. You should have creativity. You should be innovative. You should have empathy. You should be resilient. You should have emotional intelligence. You should have humility. You should have transparency. And you should have a vision and be able to operate with purpose. According to lists like these, leaders are the pinnacle of the human race. It's almost impossible to live up to it. And I think what lists like these often leave behind is the fact that leaders are also just human, imperfect, fallible, struggling with the same thing that all of us are struggling with, but with the added pressure and expectation to lead hundreds, if not thousands of people into a new future. The expectation on leadership is twofold. We need leaders who have depth and substance, who can connect with us at a very core and deep level and make us feel certain amidst all the chaos. But we also need leaders who are bold and who are courageous and who will guide us into the future. I saw this amazing tweet that said, I crave leadership that instills a hope for the future and a sense that people care for each other. And I think that's exactly what it's about. So this is a talk dedicated to leaders leading this transition into the future, knowing that we are always in transition. We are always going from where we are to where we need to be. We are always going from what is to what could be. And I hope that these 5 ideas that I'm going to share with you today will help you, will assist you on this ever-expansive journey that you are on. So the very first thing I want to share with you is about an inner transition that we all need to pay attention to. So it's good to know that when we speak about change and transition, that there are actually 2 different things. Change is a physical thing. It is what we see happen in the outside world. It is external to us and we can observe it. It is what happened when we went from working in the office to working remotely. It is what happened when we used to dress up our bodies to go outside, but now we have to dress up our faces as well. That's change. But we often forget that there's also a transition, an inner psychological journey that we need to go on that accompanies this external change. If you only focus on the physical change and you neglect the inner transition of the people that you are leading, you are setting yourself up for massive failure down the road. I've heard before that in times of war, they actually had 2 tents on the battlefield. The one tent was for those who were physically injured, so the injuries that we could see. And the other was for people who suffered emotional trauma. And it kind of strikes me that during this time, we've set up many of these first type of tents, but have we set up enough of these second type of tents? Are we paying attention to the transition, the emotional pain that people are going through? As a leader, you must lead change and transition. But here's the catch. You can't lead transition if you don't go through it yourself first. Because you cannot lead people to a destination that you aren't willing to go to. So where do you start with this inner transition for yourself? Well, I'm glad you asked. The best place to start is with your own resistance. Stephen Pressfield wrote a book called The War of Art. And in it, he speaks about the resistance, this feeling that we get when we are doing something new or doing something that is meaningful. And during the pandemic, I think many leaders have had the opportunity to come face to face with their resistance. Because change always surfaces our insecurities and our fears. And if we don't deal with it, then we are very likely to project it onto the people that we care about, the people that we are trying to lead. The question that I've actually received the most over the past couple of weeks has been, how do I make sure that my team stays productive? So at a glance, it seems like this is a question about project management, a very valid question if you're leading a remote team. But if you listen closely, you'll find that actually there's an element of trust in here. Actually, if we had to honestly reframe that question, it would be, I don't trust my team. How do I make sure they stay productive? But if you just stop there, you'll miss an even deeper level. Because at a deeper level, it's really a leader saying, I don't trust myself to lead in an environment where I can't see my people. This is new. I haven't done it before. And so my reaction is to project. My reaction is to control, to micromanage, to do whatever I can to put myself back in the driver's seat. And so that's why for leaders, we need to pay attention to our own inner resistance, our fears, our insecurities about the future of work and the future of leadership and the future of teams. And the more you can identify that, the quicker you can start letting it go. And letting it go becomes that first step of the transition. So William Bridges speaks about transitions in a beautiful way. He says that every transition starts with an ending. We then move to a neutral zone and then culminates in a new beginning. So let me take you through this. I think it's quite poetic that a transition starts with an ending. But you'll know that endings are very painful. If you've ever been broken up with, or if a business has failed, you'll know that that ending really hurts. And so what do? We try and avoid the ending. We do whatever we can not to let it go. Yet we know that the only way we move forward, the only way we go from here to there is by letting go. It's important during this time to also name what is being lost, what we are leaving behind. And of course, for many leaders and teams, we've had to really just jump in and get creative and be reactive to what happened around us. And we might run the risk of rushing past dealing with endings. It's important for us to take note of what is being lost and that it's not just about the physical space for many teams. Our identities are very closely tied to the work that we do. In fact, we get a lot of physical cues from the office, from when we arrive there, how we stand in relation to others, perhaps where your desk is sitting on at the office. And that also gets lost when we don't have those physical cues to tell us, this is who you are. So in December last year, I moved to a different house. And if you've ever moved house, you'll really resonate with the story. You spend years and years putting your life together and making your house look exactly the way you want it to look. And then one day, whether it's forced or unforced, you have to move. And so you start packing your life into boxes. and you realize, first of all, how much garbage you've collected over the years, and you swear that you're going to be living a minimalistic lifestyle moving forward. And of course, that never happens. But you continue packing your life into these boxes, and one day you realize you've just packed the last thing into this box. And so the trucks arrive, and they cart away your entire life. And you go through this ritual. You go room to room, and you have one last look. You make sure nothing is left behind, and you switch off the light. And you keep doing that until there's only one thing left to do. You walk to the door, you turn around, you have your final look. You reminisce about where you spent time braaiing with your friends, where you spent time cuddled up on the couch watching movies. And then when you're done, you switch off the light, you close the door, and you walk away. I'm wondering how many teams and how many leaders have created this space for themselves to have one last look, to have one final look at what is being left behind so that they can close the door and then start walking away. In 1984, the CEO, Haier, a global powerhouse in the appliances industry, got a new CEO. And his very first act was to take 76 fridges into the courtyard and to tell his employees to smash it. So by the way, these were faulty, and it's 1984, so don't be mad. But I think it was a great gesture to show that we are leaving the old behind and we are moving into the new. Also, please don't go and smash any computers after listening to this. So once you get through this ending, once you start letting go, you find yourself in the neutral zone, also known as the wilderness. And I love this description of it, because the wilderness is a time of wandering, of formation, a time where there's really no clarity and it feels like everyone might just be walking in their own directions. And I'm pretty sure during this time, you've experienced exactly this, a feeling of not really knowing what's going to happen next or where you should be moving to. But it can be misleading, because when you are in the wilderness, you might not see a lot of change externally, but there's an inner recalibration happening for people. They are starting to form new identities. They are starting to create more clarity. And I think what is so important for leaders who find themselves in the wilderness is to create a sense of belonging for your teams. If everyone is walking in the same, in different directions, gather them, make sure that they still feel like they have a place, like they have a mission and a purpose, and that they belong, and that we are walking this road together. And finally, we then emerge and we get to the new beginning, a space where we have clarity, a space where there's excitement, where action accelerates again and it feels really good and we feel like we're back in flow and back in focus. But leaders, here's one of the biggest things that you need to take away from our session today. It is that it won't be long before a new disruption comes along, or a new pandemic hit, or there's another market crash. Jordan Peterson said that you must dismiss the idea that you get to have permanent security. And that's why I think it's so important to become comfortable with leading in transition. Leading change, but also leading transition. So once we then move on from this, the second thing that I'd like to share with you is the currency of leadership in transition. And the currency is trust. And I'm sure it's not hard for you to see why the currency of transition, where there's chaos, where there's turmoil, where we are in a space of wandering, it's not hard to see why trust is the most important thing to cultivate during that time. I want you to do me a favor. Think of someone who you really distrust. It might be a friend or a colleague or a boss or a political figure. I'm definitely not going to give any examples here. But think about the feelings that it elicits for you. When you think of this person, what kind of bubbles up for you? When I think of someone that I distrust, I find myself being quite hesitant, and I find myself having very low levels of commitment towards any course of action they might recommend. Now, imagine if I was in your employ and you had one or two of us who were hesitant, who had very low levels of commitment. Imagine once your team starts feeling like that. Imagine once your organization starts feeling like that. Trust is one of the most important factors that we need to pay attention to when we are leading in transition. And I think it might be useful for you to know that there are two different types of trust. The first type is affective trust. So it's about affection. It's about how we feel. It's about the vibe that we have. And you can imagine that this is best created when we are actually meeting in person. I'm sure you've met someone before, and within about 10 or 15 seconds, there's a feeling that you have about how much you think you can trust this person. The second type of trust is affective trust. And this has to do about the way that we get to do the work that we're supposed to do, the deadlines that we hit. Are you an effective person? And you can see how this kind of trust could be quite easily built online. So it's very easy to have one type of trust, but not the other. And I think as leaders, we really need to pay attention to how we are building both kinds of trust. It's easy for me to believe that you will get the job done, but still not believe that you have my best interest at heart for the long run. So how do we then build this? Well, three things. We focus on benevolence, acts of benevolence. It really just means kindness. It means having a bit of understanding. I was reminded this morning about the Canadian government who sent out a note to all their employees saying that you are not working from home, you are at home during a crisis trying to work. Your personal, mental, and emotional health is far more important than anything else. An act of kindness and benevolence and understanding and empathy. The second is integrity. During this time, I've spoken to so many teams who are doing this daily huddle of theirs. And I've seen how for some teams, this daily huddle builds the team and builds trust. But for other teams, it actually destroys the fabric of the team. And I wondered why that was. So I did a bit of an investigation. And what I realized was the teams where trust was built created this daily huddle because they really wanted to get to know each other, support each other, be there for each other, and have this daily check-in at both a emotional level and at a task level. But for the teams where trust was destroyed, where the team was actually being broken down by this action, what was happening is that the organization said, we are organizing this huddle because we care, but really the intention was, we want to make sure that you are at your station at the right time, that you are actually dressed, that you're actually doing the work that you are supposed to be doing. And the thing is, people are great at sensing your intentions. And so when there's a mismatch between what you say and do, people know. The integrity breaks down, and so does the team. And then the final thing is competence. And competence is just your ability to deliver what you say you will. Trust has been shown time and time again to be one of the most important factors when it comes to increasing performance in a team. One of the most important factors when it comes to building cohesiveness in a team. And you can bet on it that it's more important than ever when we are operating in teams where we can't see each other all the time. Trust is very easily broken. You break it by surveilling your people, by micromanaging them, by not speaking about the things that need to be spoken about. And we would do well to really look for opportunities to build up and build on trust. The third thing that I'd like to share with you then is the idea of hybrid vigor. So let me introduce you to one of my favorite people in the world, Axel, my dog. So he's my co-working partner, and this is what I have to deal with pretty much on a daily basis. So we got Axel about a year and a half ago, and I initially wanted a purebred pup. But we saw him on the internet and we fell in love and we said, well, let's get him. And obviously we knew that he was a crossbreed. So once he was settled in, we actually did a DNA test on him, and it turned out that he was 60% German Shepherd and 40% Alaskan Malamute. And I was speaking to the trainer one day, and she told me about this phenomenon called hybrid vigor. And hybrid vigor is the idea that you can take two different breeds, and when you put them together, the offspring is actually better, faster, stronger, because you end up breeding out some of the deficiencies. And I mean, I'm no vet, and I might be completely wrong here, but when I look at Axel, he doesn't have the sloping back of his German purebred counterparts. And so I'm thinking that he's probably going to be less predisposed to things like hip dysplasia, etc. And I want you to bank this idea that we can take two different breeds and we can create something new. And I want you to come with me on this journey to understand that we live in a very binary world. A world that feels like it's always competing with itself. It's black or it's white. And I'm a big fan of competition, but not this kind of competition. So here's what I mean. If I say to someone, I think millennials are great in the workplace, I'll have an uprising of people that say to me, well, what about the boomers? If I say that women have been excellent, they've shown excellent leadership capabilities during this time, this COVID pandemic, I'll have an uprising of people saying to me, but what about these men? And I think it's such a restricted view of looking at the world. It's a view that says if someone else is winning, I must be losing. And I think one way that we move beyond this is instead of looking to these things as threats, to rather say, I want that. I want you to bring your absolute best to me, to my team, to my organization. And so what we end up doing is we create hybrid vigor in our organizations. We bring the best of different worlds together. We've actually been doing it for years. We know that men and women in a team creates a better team. We know that age diversity in a team creates a better team. We know that racial diversity in a team creates a better team. What we need to do is more of it. The opportunity that we have, that I'm so excited about, is that we can engineer a new breed of leadership, of teams, of organizations moving forward. The pure breeds are going to die out because their range is limited. They don't have what it takes to operate in a world where complexity is increasing. The only way we deal with that complexity is through hybrid vigor, through the crossbreeds, through the hybrids. And I can't wait to see all of them rise up. The next thing that I'd like to share with you then is about being anti-fragile. Nassim Taleb wrote about anti-fragility in 2014 in a book by the same name. And I think the term in many ways is quite self-explanatory. It's the opposite of fragile. But one distinction to make is that it doesn't mean resilience. So something that is resilient stays the same when pressure and force and disorder and chaos is applied to it. But something that is anti-fragile actually grows from chaos. It gets stronger, it excels. I think the term is pretty easy to understand at a very basic level. For me personally, just knowing of the existence of this idea of being anti-fragile has been extremely reassuring during this time. And I think why it's been so reassuring is because when you meditate on the idea of becoming anti-fragile as a person, there's this constant call to action that says, how will you grow from this? And what I've come to realize over time is that perhaps how we become more anti-fragile as human beings is by actually deepening our character, by doing more work on ourselves at a very deep level, working on our attachments, our beliefs, our character traits. When I started coaching years ago, I always wanted to optimize people. That was my thing. I wanted to turn you into a high-performing machine. And then at some point I realized that performance is actually very fragile. Because if performance drops and your identity is tied to it, guess what goes with it? Your ego, your sense of self. But when you do some deep inner work, when you take this time to really clarify who you are, and maybe more importantly, who you want to be, when you can identify the character traits that you need to develop to have more depth in who you are, then I think you really become anti-fragile. And it just so happens again that perhaps one of the easiest places to start is with your resistance. The final thing that I'd like to share with you then is the principle of accretion. So I wrote about this in 2015, and there was a quote that went with this that has been seared into my brain, and I'll never forget it. The quote goes, "No one charts a course to mediocrity, yet it's a destination of choice. It's chosen in small ways over time. And these tiny, seemingly inconsequential decisions accumulate and eventually result in a state of crisis." Accretion simply means that we as human beings accumulate. We accumulate the small decisions and the small actions that we take every single day. And ultimately that gives us the life that we have, the business that we have. And for a while, I thought, well, it's probably good enough just to collect these small decisions and actions. But what I came to realize is that when we speak about small actions and decisions, people also think that it doesn't require as much effort. And that is just wrong. Because what accretion really means, if you really want to be good at it, is that you need to collect your best decisions and your best actions. I always think of the story of Kyle MacDonald when I talk about accretion. So if you don't know the story, go find it on YouTube. It's actually very interesting. In 2005, he decided to start with a red paperclip and see what he could trade it for. So it was inspired by some game show that he watched before. And so he started with this red paperclip and he traded that for a fish-shaped pen. He took that fish-shaped pen and he traded it for a doorknob. He took the doorknob and he traded it for a gas stove. And so he kept trading up and up and up over the course of a year. His 13th trade was for a minor role in a movie. And his 14th trade was for a house. When you focus on the best small decisions and the best small actions that you can take, then you are trading up. You are trading up for a bigger and a better life. You are becoming a better leader. So, thank you for your attention today. We're going to go to the Q&A section very soon. Before we get to that, if there was a slide that you were going to screenshot, it would be the next one, but only once I get through all the points. A very quick recap of what we spoke about today is that we are always in transition. But as leaders, and this is maybe the biggest thing that I would like you to take from this today, is you should lead change. That's quite obvious, but you should also lead transition. Understand that people are going through a wandering. Understand that there's a beginning, that there's an ending, and that your people might be in different phases, and that you might progress through these phases much quicker than others. And if that's the case, you need to slow down. But also remember that you cannot lead transition if you don't go through it yourself. The second thing we spoke about is that if you are leading in transition, the currency of that leadership is trust. And that we should look for ways to build both affective and effective trust. I know that's not pronounced, but I'm just trying to make a point. The third thing is to cultivate hybrid vigor. To really ask yourself, how can I take the best of different worlds and bring it together to create something new, a new breed of leadership, a new breed of teams? But it also means, how do you cultivate hybrid vigor in your own life? And I think it is exposing yourself to different experiences, and it is learning across a wide variety of fields. We spoke about deepening your character, about doing your own personal development as a way of becoming anti-fragile. And then finally, we spoke about the fact that we are always busy accumulating decisions, accumulating actions, and that we should be a lot more intentional about it. And that we shouldn't think that small means less effort, because it doesn't. So that is it from me. Thank you very much. We are going to jump into some Q&A. Mark is right here. I have not looked at the chat box at all.
I have to say a big love to Erik. And one of my favorite parts of this medium is there's so much detail in what Erik was just speaking about. And I really think that value will come from not only hearing him now, because as I was sitting behind the scenes listening to this webinar, my brain would run off in different sections as he spoke about things that really resonated with me. And then I'd almost come back to you and you'd be like 10 seconds down the line. And I think this is why the recording of this would be so powerful. So I really just want to say thank you to you. I think that you did such an excellent job. It was really concise, to the point, and just so powerful. So what we want to do is we want to go to the Q&A section. And please, either using Q&A, try use the Q&A section, because at least we can mark the different questions as answered. Are you picking up anything specific that you want to jump to? You can pick all the questions.
I think one of the things that always comes up first. So obviously I left some of the things like slightly more open, but one thing I often get asked is like, how do we apply accretion into our own lives? And it's quite interesting, because I think there's many ways to go about it. One of the easiest ways is to go through your day and say, well, what is the better decision here? And I think without even having a goal, without having something that you're working towards, just knowing that, just evaluating each decision and each action for its merit, you could already make better decisions and better actions. So it's about cultivating that awareness. The second way to do it is to actually have a theme. So if we come back to the idea of anti-fragility, you identify a specific trait that you are working on, and then you run this as a filter throughout your entire day. And you are looking for opportunities to be more of whatever it is. So for example, assertiveness has been like on my list for about 2 years. And I'm always looking for opportunities where I can be more assertive. And I think that's partly then the accretion, the building up of finding those moments. And then obviously, like the last and probably the most obvious way is that we create a big goal for ourselves, and that we backtrack and say, well, what are the small steps, the small decisions that lead us to that goal?
Yeah, your concept of accretion, when I first heard you speak about it about 3 years ago, really, it changed me because it made me realize the power. It sounds so simple, but it's not always obvious. So this idea that accretion is just the little second by second, minute by minute decisions that you make. And when you start to recognize the power of what those decisions look like in the long term, you then start to really respect detail, intention, and every little thing that you do. Instead of just kind of being like, who cares about the little detail, you start to really respect and value detail. And so accretion for me, like if you actually go look at most people, what's happening in their lives, or if you go look at where things sometimes go wrong or the path that things go, you'll realize that it's actually, we tend to think of silver bullets, like it was this one thing you did wrong. When in reality, it's not. It's a culmination of tiny little decisions that were made over time. My point is, when you get to that place that you understand that, you start to respect accretion and you start to respect everyday little details. You have another question there that you might want to take?
So I got one from Carol here saying, can leaders learn to lead, or is it a natural characteristic? And again, I think it's both. I love, hyper vigor like ties in so beautifully with my view of the world as well, that things aren't binary, that some people are born with an ability to lead. They naturally gravitate towards that kind of role. But that for many people, it is a skill that you can iterate on, that perhaps you even get thrust into the position. And I think this happens for many business owners, actually. You start a business, it's just you, and you're quite happy with it like that. And then one morning you wake up and you have like 20 people working with you, and you have to all of a sudden be a leader. So you didn't necessarily think that was like why I got into business, but now you have to lead. And it's very much a skill that can then be taught. And I think a great way of teaching that skill for yourself is obviously going through books. You know, these big lists, I'm not always a big fan of them. I think it can be a bit overwhelming. But I think when you are spending time with a coach and even with the people that are working for you, and you are getting feedback from them on what makes you better or where you can work on improving your skills, that's ultimately the best way to grow as a leader, is to work on that internal and the external feedback loop that helps you to grow.
Yeah, we seem to get asked this a lot, not just from a leadership perspective, but in general. People seem to wonder, is some like leaders, you get this a lot, are leaders born or made? And I think a lot happens in sport. I remember watching an interview with, I think it was Sean Pollock once, and he nailed it so perfectly. He's like, obviously you get some cricketers or some sport people who are just born and they have this natural talent, but it's still something that they absolutely have to cultivate over time. And then you get these guys who maybe aren't, they're obviously still talented, but they're not born with that, just like that almost genius level talent. But it's because of that then they start working their socks off. And there's something to be said for, again, the accretion of hard work. You put the time in, you put the effort in. If your intention is, I want to be a better leader, I want to be whatever, and you put the work in, you can pretty much match the best just because you outwork them. Would you say?
Yeah.
Is there a question you want to jump?
So Amin said, what is the best way to communicate future certainty to the team when you yourself aren't too certain yourself?
Great question.
It is a great question. So what pops to mind for me first, so where do you find yourself? It means that you are stuck in the wilderness. And one of the things that leaders need to be comfortable with is to say that I don't know what the future looks like. I'm not quite sure. And that we are ultimately going to co-create it. And so if you are in the wilderness, remember what's important is to create a sense of belonging, is to create a sense that we are still in this together and that people feel like they have purpose on the team. I think what also helps is to shorten the time horizon, is to stop thinking about it in months or quarters, but let's just bring it down and let's just focus on the next couple of days, the next week. And I think that also gives people a little bit more certainty, because even though we might not have it for the long term, at least we know what needs to happen in the short term.
Yeah, there's been something to be said a lot over the last few years about vulnerability. And I think it's showing that there's definitely a place for it. Let me go back. Vulnerability is something that's being spoken about a lot these days, but still people grapple around that. I've always seen in these situations that if someone can literally, I want to compromise these two things together, vulnerability with optimism, I think is a real thing. I think there's huge value in saying to a group of people or your team, you don't always know, but I absolutely believe on the back of X, Y, and Z that things are going to be better. Do you know what I mean? I don't think you have to have the answers to everything, but there is something to be said for saying, like, I'm not sure, but I'm really optimistic. And if you believe that, I think that optimism is not always believing that everything's positive. It's just believing that the best is still to come. And it shows you that then where you place your attention is where you place your energy. And so your thoughts become realities. And there's a real science to this. It's not just this made up thing, but vulnerability mixed with optimism really seems to hold water. Next for us.
How are we doing on time, by the way?
No, I've got you on time. Don't you stress.
Perfect. So Peter said, I understand that trust is fundamental for a team to function optimally, but how do you deal with an untrustworthy team member?
I'm going to let
That's
you.
That's a
Good luck.
good question. So obviously, I think one of the first things is we neglect the most obvious thing, which is that we have to just go and speak about it. There must have been a moment where the trust was broken. And what we tend to do in teams is we have these lists of things we call the undiscussables. And everyone kind of knows it exists. It's sitting somewhere in the background, but we don't dare talk about it. And whenever I'm working with a team, that's one of the first things that I want to know is I want to see what are the relationships like in the team, where's the tension in the team. And then we have to surface that and we bring it to the front, because if you feel like there isn't trust, like how would you deal with that if it was a friend of yours? You would go and speak to them about that and you'd want to clear the air. So that would be the very first thing that I always think about is let's go and actually have a conversation and clear this up, because perhaps it can be rebuilt. And it might be good to say, listen, trust is kind of broken down here. How do we rebuild this? But the second option is that, if you have people on your team that you don't trust, then why do you have them on your team? it's such a difficult thing to talk about, but it's just a reality as well. But the third thing I would say is, if you come to me and say someone is untrustworthy, I'm always going to ask you first, why do you say that? What's happening for you? And you want to make sure that it's not your own projection onto them, and that you have your own story about it. And that's why very often it's actually very useful to go and speak to them, because there might have been some miscommunication, some misunderstanding, and you could actually clear it up with one conversation.
Listen, that's a really tough question to tackle. And I think these things are obviously very contextual. There's no question about it that it's not an easy one to deal with. But I agree with you. There's something to be said for, when people judge, I've always found this fascinating. When people judge you, oftentimes it's not something that you're doing. It's something that they're putting their stuff on you. I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but it's just always interesting to note that there are many versions of why someone is untrustworthy.
Yeah.
I just want to quickly just check where we're at here. Okay, great. From a timing perspective, you have a few more. We've still got a little bit of time.
Yeah, so I just want to address, I've seen two questions where I think maybe I wasn't clear enough. So let me just make sure I clear it up for you guys as well. So one question has said, do you think every employee needs to go through all these phases as well? Definitely. And that was actually kind of the point that I was trying to get to today, is that as a leader, you need to understand that everyone in your organization is going through this. And so you can't just lead the change. You can't just lead how we go from working at the office to working remotely. You also have to lead the fact that people are stuck in different phases. And you have to be patient and allow them to also go through those transitions, those inner transitions. Otherwise, I think you end up, like I said, down the road where people are burnt out. We haven't spoken about the expectations. We haven't spoken about the fact that our routines are out of whack, and that going through a pandemic has put a lot of emotional burden on us. And so what do you do then? Then you just kind of fighting fires where you could have been creating a more clear-cut transition for the people that work with you. So I wanted just to make sure that's clear.
Yeah. One of the big things when I asked you to do this segment, my thinking was that COVID has now literally thrown everything apart. And I tend to have this view, and maybe, I'm biased, that everyone has now become a leader. You're a leader in some format. So a lot of people tend to do this thing where like, oh, this talk's not necessarily for me. No, if you're part of a team, if you are part of a company, if you work for a living, if you have anybody as family, if you have friends, you are a leader. It's kind of the same way I think people they not realize that you are also in sales, you are also in marketing. These topics are absolutely relevant to every living, breathing person. And again, sometimes the people who want to pull away from that are just the ones who tell themselves a story that they aren't leaders. But in reality, I think of every one of you watching are leaders. We probably have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. I'm going
I just want to just iterate on 2 more things. The one was, I see as someone said that competence is fragile. That's not what I said. Performance is fragile. So I think you actually, you corrected me on that as well. So, but performance is fragile. So competence for me is really part of how we build trust, right? So competence is that I'm delivering what I say I will deliver, and to a high standard. So remember, the 3 ways we build trust is through benevolence. And I mean, there's many other ways, but this is a very nice model: benevolence, integrity or honesty, and competence. Let me just see what else there is, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a bunch of things swirling around in my head as we go through, because I think these topics are so complex. You could literally speak about them. People could ask questions for hours upon hours, but a lot of it is contextual. And what you're trying to provide is really solid frameworks for people to think and then make contextual decisions. Have you found something there for us that you might want to answer?
Yes, I mean, I think this is also, kind of the crux of what we were speaking about today. How to build trust when we are not in actual physical contact. So again, that's why it's worth understanding there are 2 different types of trust, and that we have affective trust and effective trust. And one is built by you doing what you say you would do. So the effective part of it, but then also the affectionate part of it. And so just thinking about it, how do we do that in a virtual environment? Well, obviously the one part is, as a leader, I make sure I deliver on time. I model that behavior for others. And we still expect that of each other. I think if I look at what's been happening, like the biggest challenges for team during this time, there's 4 that really stand out. The first was all of the technical glitches that we've had. And someone called it the LCD, the lowest common denominator, that if tech fails for someone, whether that's connection or laptop, whatever the case may be, then it puts the whole team out of whack because people can't connect to each other. So you have to sort out tech. You have to make sure everyone's routines are in place. We've seen people's routines have just been all over the show. They're sleeping much later. They're waking up much later. They haven't found structure in their days. You have to make sure that we renegotiate many of the social contracts that have happened. So for teams, ideally, you want to be very explicit. You want to have some sort of a team agreement or a team operating system. Most teams don't have that. They have an unwritten one. They have one that we all just assume this is how things are supposed to be. The problem is when you just assume, it means that the assumption is if you send me an email 9 o'clock at night, I should be replying because we haven't set those agreements firmly in place. So we should have expectations around all of the ways that we work together. And then finally, around disconnection. So we should be able to disconnect from work. That's the one part here. The second is that we've been feeling very disconnected from our teams. So if we're saying that building effective trust on the one hand is about making sure we get the work done, then the only question to ask yourself is how do we build the affectionate part of it? And it seems that, there are many ways and opportunities to actually jump on a Zoom call and actually just spend time talking, not necessarily jumping straight into the work that needs to be done. And if you go and look around, you'll find plenty of examples of people saying like host a virtual coffee meeting or do a quiz online together. But you have to also understand, and I think this is something that took me a bit of time to get used to, is that the digital world is not the same as the offline world. And you can't expect it to be. When I started doing team facilitations online, I found myself saying all the time, it's just not the same. And actually that it's just not the same got in the way of me using the medium to its fullest capability. So when I moved past that and I said, it's just not the same, but it's also not supposed to be, it actually freed me up to go and do whatever I needed to do. And now I know that I'm not comparing them. They're different. So let's treat them differently. And therefore, it's just good to keep in mind then that if we are functioning in a different world, in a different medium, perhaps you start by building effective trust first. So we get the job done. That's where you start with trust. And then you layer onto that, how do we create the affectionate trust by having more conversations where we're not just talking about work that needs to be done. I won't open this can of worms.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. It's so.
I was going to go in a different direction there.
I want to stress that I think that you hit the nail on the head. If we just take this entire webinar series, what's happened was I did the same thing as a speaker. My attitude was, but this is not the same. I don't feel the crowd. Right now when I'm looking here, I'm just looking at a camera. It's dark. It's just cold. So I had this whole thing about it's not the same. Speaking to an audience versus looking at what I'm looking at now. But where in the world, from a live perspective, would you be able to host webinars with 1,000+ people attending live at a fraction of the cost, people being able to watch the recording afterwards? Like you're right, as soon as we got our heads around, it's not the same, they're different. And when face-to-face comes back, we can kind of have both. We will have gained the skill sets. Erik, I really want to say thank you for being here, for being part of this. I want to do 2 things as we close off from your end. One is I want to leave you with the last word from your, it doesn't have to be educational. You've got an audience of a bunch of people here. I would love for you to just share your kind of last word or something that you want to leave people with. And then I'd love to know how people can get hold of you, follow you on social, etc.
I think as I was writing this talk, the feeling that I just got over and over was that we need to connect at a deeper level. And that really is the future of leadership. Like, forget all of those 15, 20 point, 30 point lists. Like, just start connecting with people at a deeper level and understand that you aren't just operating in the external world where things are changing, but you are also dealing with an internal world for everyone, but for yourself first. Like, don't forget about that. So I think if I had to just summarize everything in one go is lead change, but also lead the transition. And get hold of me on modernbreed.com. I think that should take you to all my socials, but otherwise just look for me on Instagram, Erik Kruger. But the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. That's it, dude.
Give me a hug, brother.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you. I really have a lot of love for you. I have to stand on my tippy toes to, you might want to take it off before you jump out of shot. Guys, thank you so much. I really want to just give you a little bit of love. I want to just say thank you for being part of this. What we did last week, if you were here, I'm just want to see where everybody's at. What we did last week is we had a huge sponsor section, and we spent the week listening to your feedback. So after every session, you're going to get an email from us. You're going to get almost in the next while an email with the link to the recording from today. You're also going to get the email asking for some feedback. A lot of what the feedback said last week was you loved the content. You just felt the end was a little bit disjointed. So we took that to heart. As I close off with you, this is not going to be a big push on sponsors, etc. But I do want to leave you with a closing thought, so to speak. I think it's worth that. You'll see in the beginning we landed. This is what's happening. While we can't see this, I just want to close that there. That helps. There we go. So the closing thought that I want to leave you with is as follows. You would have seen in the beginning of this webinar that we showed the two videos, one of Talk IT and Amazon Web Services. This entire series that's been brought together is as a result of them. So I really just want to say thank you to each and every one of them for putting this together. And our aim really was to create a contract with you as the audience. That contract being one that I love. It comes from Gary Vaynerchuk. He says, jab, 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 right hook. The idea is that you give, and then you ask. So this is not a big push or punt to you. This is to say, with the first 2 weeks of content, as you've seen, we've really tried to create or bring about speakers and topics that we hoped would add value to you, especially in these crazy times. And that's the goal. Ultimately, over 5 weeks, we just want to keep bringing you speakers and topics that will add value to you and that will help you become a better version of yourself, both personally and professionally. So I really just want to give them a little bit of love, AWS and Talk IT, for bringing all of this together. For me, as the CEO of Suits and Sneakers, we've just helped bring this series to life. The thing that we've tried to add to it is the professionalism of the studio, the curation of the content, the marketing, and so forth. But really, it's these guys that have done so well, and I just want to give them big love for making this all possible. So thank you to AWS and Talk IT for bringing this together. Thank you to each and every one of you for pulling this. Eric, thank you so much for bringing. There's so much in what you said there. Like, I really was sitting there, I was taking notes, but there's no question I'm going to have to go sit and watch the recording. And this is probably one of my favorite things about this medium, is that this is exactly what we can do. We can go back, you can absorb whatever you absorbed, and you can rewatch it 3, 4, 5 times if you like, and focus on specific parts. I really want to encourage you to do so. Next week, we're going to be bringing in a guy named Brad Shawkend. He's going to be talking about business continuity through human continuity. And it's actually quite ironic, Eric, just the way you ended, because you were talking about deeper levels of connection. And it lines up so beautifully into the topic that Brad is bringing about. Brad's got a company called Still Human, and his thinking during this time has been, with all this technology that is so pervasive in our lives, and with everything, with all the abundance and the opportunity that tech enables, it's still just a means to the end. And we can never forget the human interaction, the human connection, the human function. So it really just ties into what Eric spoke about so well. So I just want to recap with you. Week 1, we had John Sane talking about future now. He was trying to set a general context. Where have we come from? Where are we now because of COVID? And what is the type of world that we're moving into from here? Then today's session was really centered around Eric with leadership in transit. The idea was, how do we get into the detail? What does leadership look like? What does being a human being in the workplace look like? How do we function as teams when we are working from home? How do we operate in this new paradigm that really has no precedent? And I think that you got into the detail beautifully. Next week, we move into Brad Shawkend talking about the human aspect, tying all of this together. 4th and 5th speakers, we'll let you know as they come through, but really this is the goal and the art. So what I want to do is I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being part of this. Thanks to our sponsors. I really want to ask you for some help, and the help is, help us spread the word with this series. As you guys know, it's free. It's available at any point in time for you to watch the recordings. All we're trying to do is give as much value as possible in exchange for a little bit of attention in bits and pieces, to be able to kind of share some of the products and services that these guys like AWS and Talk IT have put together. But ultimately, we're really just trying to make sure that people on the other end that watch it get value. So the help that I really want to call from you is help us spread the word. Help tell other people about this. Even if they can't make it live, like you guys know, then they can watch the recording. So that's it from us. Big love to AWS. Big love to Talk IT. Thank you, Erik Kruger, for coming through. Thank you to John for the week before. Thank you to each and every one of you for watching. We are over and out. Thank you for being part of this, and we will see you next week, same place, same time, from Mark Sham, over and out. Thank you, guys.